The wind had already erased half the footprints. Snow moved sideways across the open field, cutting visibility down to a few yards. Patrol lights flashed against white emptiness. Radios crackled, then went silent again under the weight of the storm. Officer Daniel Ruiz tightened his grip on the long lead attached to Rex's harness. Rex lowered his head, nose working fast, drawing in layers of scent buried under cold air. "Track," Daniel said, steady but firm. Rex moved forward, then stopped, not distracted, not confused. Stopped. His body stiffened, ears angled back. He looked left, away from the direction the rest of the team had already committed to. Daniel frowned. No. Track. Rex didn't pull. He didn't disobey wildly. He just leaned his weight slightly in the opposite direction. Behind them, Sergeant Mallory shouted through the wind, "We don't have time to debate the dog, Ruiz. The kid's last known point is east of the tree line." The missing child. 8 years old. Last seen leaving a neighbor's barn 30 minutes before dusk. Temperature dropping fast. Snow coming down harder by the minute. Daniel felt the pressure building in his chest. Rex's behavior wasn't random. It never was. But conditions were bad. Scent could pool in strange places during storms. Crosswinds could distort direction. Daniel gave the command again. Rex took 2 steps east, then stopped, and slowly turned his head back west. Daniel crouched, gloved hand resting on Rex's shoulder. The dog's breathing was quick, controlled, not panicked, focused. The leash tightened again, west. Ruiz. Mallory's voice carried irritation now. "We already deployed 2 units east. We're burning daylight." Daniel hesitated. Then, he made the call he would question for months. "Track east," he said, more firmly. Rex obeyed. But he didn't run. He moved reluctantly, checking back twice, nose lifting as if scent was thinning instead of strengthening. They pushed through snow that reached mid-calf. Daniel's legs burned. Rex's gait shortened slightly, fatigue setting in faster in the cold. 10 minutes in, Daniel knew something felt wrong. The dog's tail stayed neutral. No forward drive, no scent lock. Mallory's radio crackled. Negative findings on our grid. Expanding another 100 yards. Daniel swallowed. Rex stopped again. This time, he didn't pull west. He simply sat. In the middle of the storm. That wasn't defiance. That was uncertainty. Daniel's heart rate ticked upward. A K9 sitting mid-track meant loss of scent. But why? He knelt again, scanning the snowfield. Wind had shifted slightly. He felt it now against the side of his face. West. Crosswind. He turned slowly. The tree line west wasn't part of the original search perimeter. It led toward a shallow drainage ditch and an older service road rarely used in winter. Rex stood on his own and leaned west again. Daniel exhaled sharply. Sergeant Mallory approached, boots crunching. "We need to stay with the grid." Daniel met his eyes. "He's not working east. You're telling me the dog's smarter than the GPS pings and eyewitness accounts? I'm telling you he's not committing, that was the truth. Not dramatics, not instinct magic, just a trained K9 refusing to falsely indicate." The wind shifted harder, and that's when Rex's posture changed. Not explosive, subtle, head lowered, ears forward, tail steady. He took 3 deliberate steps west, nose down. Daniel felt it immediately, that change. The moment scent turns real. He didn't argue again. "Track," he said quietly. Rex moved west with purpose now. Behind them, Mallory swore under his breath but followed. Snow thickened. Visibility dropped further. Rex pulled harder, then slowed, then veered slightly south. Daniel's boots slipped as the terrain dipped lower than expected. A drainage line, half covered by snowdrift. Rex circled once, twice, then froze at the edge. Daniel's pulse hammered. He scanned downward. Nothing visible. Just snow packed unevenly along the ditch bank. Rex pawed once, not a full dig, a cautious scrape. Daniel dropped to his knees, brushing snow away with gloved hands. Fabric. Blue. Small. Dispatch, Daniel's voice broke slightly into the radio. Possible article of clothing located. Mallory knelt beside him, eyes narrowing. They cleared more snow, a child's jacket sleeve. Partially buried. Daniel's stomach dropped. Careful, Mallory said quietly. They uncovered more. The jacket was empty. No body. Just the jacket. Daniel looked at Rex. The dog wasn't alerting to remains. He was searching beyond it. Nose lifted now, air scenting. Then turning slightly farther west. Toward the service road. Daniel stood quickly. He's still tracking. Mallory hesitated only a second before nodding. They followed. Snow stung their faces. Wind howled across the open road. Rex accelerated. Then suddenly, he faltered. His gait shortened sharply. Front right paw misstepped. Daniel saw it immediately, ice beneath fresh powder. Rex slid sideways, yelping once, sharp and involuntary. Daniel dropped to his knees again, checking the paw. No obvious break, but a strain. Rex tried to stand. Daniel held him gently. Easy. Mallory's voice cut in. We need him, Ruiz. Daniel knew that. But pushing a strained K9 in sub-zero wind could cause long-term damage. Rex licked snow from his nose. Tried to stand again. This time he studied. He looked west. Then back at Daniel. Not dramatic, just waiting for direction. Daniel made the call. Short track. 5 more minutes. Then we reassess. Mallory nodded. They moved slower now. Rex favoring the paw slightly but maintaining scent. Then, Rex veered sharply left. Toward a snowbank along the road's edge. He began digging. Fast. Not uncertain. Focused. Daniel's breath caught. They reached him in seconds. Snow gave way under Rex's paws. And beneath the drift, a hollow space. Wind had formed a pocket against the ditch culvert. Daniel dropped flat, reaching inside. Cold air rushed from the pocket. Then, a small sound. Weak. Not a cry, more like breath catching. Daniel's hand found fabric, then skin. Cold, but warm enough. Found him. Daniel shouted. Mallory immediately called Ems. The child was wedged against the culvert wall, partially shielded from wind by the snowdrift. Hypothermic, but alive. Barely. Daniel wrapped the child in his thermal blanket while Mallory radioed coordinates. Rex stood beside them, trembling slightly, not from fear, but from cold and strain. Daniel looked at him. If they had stayed east, he didn't finish that thought. Sirens grew closer through the storm. Daniel felt relief wash over him. But it didn't last. Because as paramedics loaded the child into the ambulance, one of them said quietly, he didn't wander here on his own. Daniel looked at Mallory. Mallory looked back. The service road had no fresh adult footprints. Wind had erased most surface evidence. But something felt off. The jacket had been separated from the child. Placed, or torn off earlier. Rex, despite his strained paw, was still sniffing along the road's edge. Not satisfied. Daniel felt it then. That shift. This wasn't just a lost child in a storm. Something didn't add up. And Rex knew it before anyone else did. The ambulance doors closed. Snow kept falling. Rex turned his head toward the dark stretch of road disappearing west, and growled softly. Not at the storm. At something that had already left. The hospital corridor smelled like antiseptic and melted snow. Officer Daniel Ruiz stood near the vending machines, jacket unzipped, uniform damp at the shoulders where flakes had soaked through. His hands were still stiff from the cold. Across the hallway, through a narrow window, he could see the small shape on the hospital bed. Eli Mercer. 8 years old. Alive. Machines beeped steadily, not urgently. Just enough to remind everyone how close it had been. Rex lay on the tile floor beside Daniel, front right paw wrapped in a temporary compression bandage. The veterinarian on call had examined him an hour earlier. Mild ligament strain, no fracture, rest. Anti-inflammatories, no field work for at least 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Daniel stared at the bandage. Rex didn't look at him. He watched the hallway instead. Alert. Ears tracking footsteps. You made the right call, Sergeant Mallory said, approaching with 2 paper cups of coffee. He handed one over. Daniel nodded but didn't drink it. I overrode him at first, Mallory shrugged. You adjusted, Daniel didn't respond. Because he kept thinking about those first 10 minutes. The direction he forced. The time lost. In search work, minutes mattered. Inside the hospital room, Eli's mother sat rigid in a chair, coat still on, hands folded too tightly in her lap. She hadn't cried in the hallway, not loudly, not dramatically. She'd just gone very still. When the doctor came out earlier and said he's stable, she didn't collapse in relief. She just nodded once. Daniel recognized that kind of reaction. Shock delayed. Processing postponed. A nurse stepped out now and approached them. You can come in for a minute, she told Daniel. But keep it short. He hesitated. Then nodded. Rex tried to rise with him. Daniel placed a hand gently on his shoulder. Stay. Rex obeyed. But his eyes followed. Inside the room, warmth hit immediately. Eli looked smaller under hospital lighting, IV in place, oxygen tubing resting lightly against his cheeks. His lips were pale but no longer blue. Mrs. Mercer stood when Daniel entered. You're the officer, she said quietly. Yes, ma'am. She looked past him, down the hallway. Where's the dog? Resting. He strained his paw during the search. Her expression shifted. Not dramatic, just something tightening around the eyes. He found him. Yes, she nodded slowly. Eli loves dogs. Daniel allowed a small smile. Rex isn't very good at fetch, but he's good at tracking. She stepped closer to the bed and brushed hair back from Eli's forehead. He told me he wanted to build a snow fort this year. I told him we'd wait for a warmer day. Daniel watched the boy's breathing. Study. Did he say anything to you? She asked. Daniel shook his head. He was too cold to speak clearly. She swallowed. He wandered? Daniel chose his words carefully. We're still piecing together the timeline that wasn't avoidance, it was truth. Because there were gaps. Mrs. Mercer nodded again. Eli said he was going to the barn to look for the stray cat he's been feeding. Daniel's brow tightened slightly. Stray cat? Yes. Orange. Shows up sometimes near the feed bins. Daniel filed that away. Not as suspicion, just as detail. Did he mention anyone else being near the barn? No. Her answer came quickly. Then slower, not that I remember. Daniel didn't press. He stepped back toward the door. He's strong. He'll recover. She looked at him directly for the first time. Thank you. Outside, Rex shifted when Daniel returned. He sniffed Daniel's gloves briefly, then settled again. Mallory checked his watch. Media's starting to gather. Word spreads fast in small towns. Daniel grimaced. He didn't want cameras. This wasn't a hero moment. This was a kid nearly freezing to death. They left the hospital through a side exit. Snow had slowed but not stopped. The patrol SUV was dusted white again. Rex climbed in carefully, favoring the wrapped paw. Daniel drove slower than usual. Neither of them liked silence. But tonight, it felt heavy. Rex hadn't always been Daniel's dog. 3 years earlier, he'd been assigned after a handler retired unexpectedly due to back injury. Rex was 2 at the time. Strong drive. Good nose. Slight hesitation under loud crowd conditions. They hadn't bonded immediately. Training had been structured. Clinical. Rex responded to commands with precision, but without the subtle synchronization that great K9 teams eventually developed. That came later. It came after Daniel made a mistake. A burglary track that ended in an alley. Rex indicated near a dumpster. Daniel assumed suspect concealment. He called backup aggressively. Turned out the scent pool was contaminated by a resident who had walked through the same area earlier. They lost the suspect. Department didn't reprimand him harshly. But Daniel replayed it for weeks. He'd read Rex's body language incorrectly. Not enough commitment in the alert. After that, Daniel adjusted. He stopped forcing interpretation. He watched more. Waited longer. Trusted hesitation as information, not failure. That shift had changed their partnership. And tonight, it may have saved Eli's life. But something still pressed at Daniel's thoughts. The jacket. The separation. The drift pocket. Children wander. They panic. They shed clothing during hypothermia confusion. That was documented behavior. But Eli had been found tucked deep into a culvert pocket, partially shielded. That required direction, not random stumbling. Daniel parked at his home and helped Rex down gently. Inside, the house was quiet. Single story. Minimal decoration. The kind of place built around work schedules rather than social gatherings. He removed Rex's harness slowly. Checked the bandage again. Rex winced slightly when weight shifted wrong. Daniel exhaled. I pushed you. Rex leaned into his leg briefly. Not forgiveness, just contact. Daniel prepared the anti-inflammatory dose per veterinary instructions and mixed it into food. Rex ate without hesitation. Later, as wind rattled the windows, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, reviewing body cam footage from the search. He watched the moment Rex first leaned west. He paused the video. Zoomed in slightly. The tree line. Beyond it, the service road. He rewound further. Back to the barn area earlier that evening. Officers had canvassed quickly before full storm onset. He noticed something he hadn't focused on earlier. Near the barn entrance, tire tracks, not farm equipment. Narrower, passenger vehicle. Partially filled with snow, he leaned closer, the tracks headed west, toward the service road. His jaw tightened. He replayed the hospital nurse's comment. He didn't wander here on his own. That could have meant anything. But combined with tire tracks, Daniel picked up his phone and called Mallory. You reviewing footage too? Mallory answered. Yeah. You see the tracks? Daniel closed his eyes briefly. You saw them, didn't want to jump. Neither did I. Silence lingered. Mallory finally said, We'll check road cameras in the morning. Storm may have compromised most of them. Daniel nodded, even though Mallory couldn't see it. Let's not run with theories yet, Mallory added. Kid could have climbed into a parked truck bed earlier. Could have been any number of things. Agreed. But Daniel knew this feeling. The small misalignment in a story. The quiet detail that doesn't fit. Rex lifted his head from the living room floor as if sensing Daniel's tension. Daniel met his eyes. You weren't done, he said softly. Rex lowered his head again, but his ears remained alert. The next morning, the storm cleared. Sunlight exposed how clean the snowfield looked. Too clean. Evidence erased. Daniel and Mallory returned to the service road. Daylight revealed clearer structure around the culvert. Snow drifted deliberately into the pocket. But there were subtle compression marks near the ditch edge. Not child-sized. Boot-sized. Daniel crouched, measuring approximate depth. Adult, he muttered. Mallory nodded. Pre-storm. They walked back toward the barn area. Farm owner, Mr. Henley, met them near the gate. Late 50s. Weathered hands. Concerned expression. You find something? Henley asked. We're checking details, Mallory replied calmly. Henley pointed toward the barn. I was inside feeding around 4. Didn't see the boy then. What about vehicles? Daniel asked. Henley thought for a moment. Neighbor drove by earlier. Blue sedan. But that's normal. Time? Maybe 5:30. Before snow got heavy, Daniel exchanged a glance with Mallory that narrowed a window. Back inside the barn, Daniel scanned again. Hay disturbed near the back wall. Not dramatically, but enough. He knelt. Rex wasn't with them, resting at home per vet orders. Daniel felt the absence acutely. He trusted Rex's nose more than his own eyes. Mallory's phone buzzed. He checked it, expression tightening. Hospital update, he said quietly. Eli's awake. Daniel stood immediately. And? He asked. Mallory met his gaze. He says someone gave him a ride. Silence settled in the barn. Snow melted slowly from the roof edges. Daniel's thoughts aligned rapidly. Tire tracks. Culvert positioning. Jacket separated. Who? Daniel asked. Mallory's jaw clenched. He says it was a man he's seen before. Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with winter, and he says the man told him not to tell. The barn felt smaller suddenly. This wasn't a wandering accident. And whatever had happened out there, Rex had sensed direction before any of them did. But now, the problem was bigger. Because if Eli had been moved deliberately, then someone in their small town had made a decision that nearly killed a child. And that meant this wasn't just search and rescue anymore. It was something else. The hospital room was quieter this time. No rush. No urgency. Just the steady rhythm of machines and the low hum of the heating system working against the lingering cold outside. Eli Mercer looked smaller awake than he had unconscious. His eyes were open, but they weren't steady. They kept shifting, toward the door, toward his mother, then down to the blanket pulled tight around his chest. Officer Daniel Ruiz stood near the window. Not looming, not interrogating, just present. Sergeant Mallory stayed closer to the hallway, giving space, but listening carefully. Mrs. Mercer sat beside the bed, her hand wrapped around her son's fingers. Eli, Daniel said gently, keeping his voice level. I just need to understand what happened so we can make sure it doesn't happen again. Eli swallowed. He said he'd drive me closer, the boy whispered. Closer to where? Mallory asked from the doorway. The barn. I was walking. He said it was cold. Daniel crouched slightly so he wasn't towering over him. Do you know his name? Eli hesitated, then shook his head. But you've seen him before? A nod. Where? Another pause. Eli's breathing changed, quicker now. Near the store. Sometimes by the gas pumps, Daniel and Mallory exchanged a glance. There was only one gas station within 5 miles of the Mercer property. Did he say why he stopped the car? Daniel asked. Eli's fingers tightened around the blanket. He said he needed to check something near the road. Did he touch you? The question was clinical, direct, necessary. Eli shook his head immediately. No, he just told me to wait. Where? In the ditch. He said it would be funny if I hid and scared my mom. Mrs. Mercer's hand trembled slightly, but she stayed quiet. Daniel kept his voice steady. Did you want to hide? Eli shook his head again. I was cold. Did he leave you there? A longer silence. Then a whisper. He said he'd be right back. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. How long were you there before you tried to move? He asked. I don't know. That was honest. 8-year-olds don't measure time in minutes during storms. Did he tell you not to tell anyone? A nod. What exactly did he say? Eli stared at the blanket. He said if I told, he'd get in trouble, and that it would be my fault. The room went still. That wasn't theatrical villainy, that was manipulation. Subtle. Simple. Effective on a child. Daniel stood slowly. Thank you, he said. You did the right thing. Eli didn't look convinced. As they stepped into the hallway, Mrs. Mercer followed. Her composure was thinner now. You think he meant to hurt him? She asked quietly. Daniel answered carefully. Right now, we know he left him in freezing conditions. Her jaw tightened. That's enough, she said. Back at the station, the atmosphere shifted. This wasn't a missing person recovery anymore. It was potential criminal negligence. Possibly worse. Mallory pulled up traffic camera feeds from the main road near the gas station. Most were partially obscured by snow glare, but one camera caught a blue sedan around 5:26 p.m. heading west, timestamp aligned, license plate partially visible. Not clean, but readable enough. Registered to a man named Carl Henson, 42. No major criminal record. 2 prior complaints for public intoxication. 1 dismissed harassment report from 3 years ago. No convictions. Daniel scanned the file. Henson lived 3 miles west of the Mercer property. Close enough. Too close. Could be coincidence, Mallory muttered. Could be, Daniel replied. But the direction, the timing, the service road proximity, it layered. They drove to Henson's address just after noon. Small house. Detached garage. Snow shoveled recently. Blue sedan parked outside. Daniel felt Rex's absence again. This was normally where the dog would circle the vehicle. Confirm scent. Provide objective grounding. Now it was just observation. They knocked. Carl Henson answered after a pause. Average build. Reddened face from cold or something else. Hard to tell. Yes? Officer Mallory spoke first. We're following up on the search last night. Henson blinked. Yeah, I heard they found the kid. Daniel watched his eyes carefully. No exaggerated fear, no dramatic reaction, just guarded. Were you near Mercer Road yesterday evening? Daniel asked. I drove past. Everyone was out looking. Did you speak to Eli Mercer? A half-second delay. Then? No. It was small. But it existed. Daniel didn't press aggressively. Mind if we take a look at your vehicle? Henson's shoulders tightened. Why? Routine follow-up, that's not an answer. Mallory's tone remained calm. If you weren't involved, this clears you faster. Henson looked toward the sedan. Then, back at them. Fine. He handed over keys. Inside the car, the heater still smelled faintly of stale coffee. Daniel scanned the back seat. Floor mat. Passenger side. A small smear of mud inconsistent with recent snowfall. He crouched lower. On the rubber mat, fine strands. Hay. Very small pieces. Daniel straightened slowly. Do you transport feed? He asked casually. No? Animals? No? Mallory stepped in. We're going to need you to come down to the station for a statement. Henson's jaw tightened. I didn't do anything. Then you have nothing to worry about. That line always sounded hollow. But it was procedure. At the station, Henson maintained the same narrative. He drove west around 5:30 p.m., didn't pick anyone up, didn't see the boy. Daniel requested consent for forensic sweep of the vehicle interior. Henson hesitated, then declined. That shifted things. Mallory stepped out to begin warrant paperwork. Daniel remained in the room with Henson. No raised voices, no dramatic confrontations, just silence stretching longer than comfortable. Henson finally spoke. You think I'd hurt a kid? Daniel met his eyes. I think you made a decision. Henson looked away first. That wasn't proof. But it mattered. Late afternoon, warrant approved. Forensics processed the sedan carefully. In the rear passenger footwell, under melted snow residue. Fibers. Blue synthetic. Matching Eli's jacket material. Preliminary match. Not definitive yet, but consistent. Daniel felt no surge of triumph, only tightening pressure. Because this wasn't a kidnapping with elaborate planning. This was something messier, more careless, more human. Why leave him? Panic? Impairment? Something else? Then came the complication. Internal Affairs requested preliminary briefing. Why? Because earlier that day, a call had come in, from Henson's cousin, claiming officers were harassing a good man without cause, claiming personal bias. Daniel's name was mentioned specifically. Because 3 years ago, Daniel had cited Henson for public intoxication. A minor charge. Dismissed, but documented. Mallory looked at Daniel carefully. They're going to ask if this is personal. It's not, Daniel replied immediately. I know that. But the optics weren't ideal. Small town. Prior interaction. Now a serious allegation. Daniel felt the ground shift slightly beneath the case. Not collapsing, but unstable. And Rex wasn't here to anchor certainty. That night, Daniel sat alone reviewing Eli's recorded statement again, frame by frame. There was a moment, subtle. When Eli described hiding in the ditch, his eyes shifted left, toward memory recall, not fabrication. That mattered. Daniel paused the footage, replayed the description of the car interior, smelled like something sour, Eli had said. Daniel thought of the sedan heater scent, stale coffee, maybe alcohol masked. Then another detail surfaced. Eli mentioned the man's glove compartment was open. Lots of papers fell out. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Papers. Earlier, in the car, he had noticed folded receipts spilling from the side pocket. Small detail, not dramatic, but layering. This wasn't clean. It wasn't cinematic. It was a pattern forming quietly. And patterns were what Rex understood best. Daniel looked over at the empty space where the K9 bed normally sat in the cruiser. He felt the absence sharply now. Because if this escalated, if internal affairs leaned in, if defense argued coercion or bias, then everything would hinge on procedure, on discipline, on restraint. And one misstep could undo the entire case. Mallory entered the room holding lab updates. Prelim fiber comparison is strong, he said, but defense will push contamination. Daniel nodded slowly. Then we build slow, he replied. Mallory studied him. You good? Daniel considered that honestly. I should have trusted the dog sooner. Mallory shook his head. You adjusted. Daniel didn't answer. Because the larger fear wasn't about the search anymore. It was about whether the department would stand behind him if the case got messy. Outside, snow began to melt under streetlights. Clean surfaces revealing what had been hidden beneath. Inside the holding room, Carl Henson sat quietly. Not raging, not confessing, just waiting. And the waiting was worse. Because this case wasn't about catching a monster, it was about proving a quiet decision that nearly cost a child his life. And proving that without overstepping, that was the real challenge. The first crack in the case didn't come from a dramatic confession. It came from temperature data. Daniel was sitting in the briefing room when the county meteorologist emailed storm progression charts. Standard procedure for exposure cases. Establish timeline. Correlate wind chill. Determine survivability window. He almost skimmed past it. Then he stopped. According to the data, the heaviest wind shift occurred at 5:42 p.m., moving west to east. If Eli had been placed in the culvert before that shift, snow would have drifted differently. The pocket formation would have partially filled sooner. Daniel pulled up the body cam timestamp. Rex first leaned west at 6:18 p.m. They found Eli at 6:37 p.m. Based on drift accumulation inside the culvert, the boy had likely been there less than 40 minutes. Not 2 hours. Less than 40 minutes. Daniel sat back slowly. That meant Eli wasn't left there immediately after being picked up. He was transported. Then placed. Later. That changed the weight of it. Mallory stepped in just as Daniel finished recalculating. You look like you found something. Daniel turned the screen toward him. Mallory read silently. Then exhaled. So he didn't panic and ditch him immediately. No, Daniel said quietly. He drove around first. That was worse. Because panic is impulsive. Driving around first suggests deliberation, not evil mastermind planning. But something heavier. Something considered. Forensics returned additional results that afternoon. Fibers from Eli's jacket matched the rear passenger mat of Henson's car with high probability. But more importantly, trace soil collected from the culvert contained small gravel fragments unique to a specific stretch of the old Quarry Road west of town. Not Mercer Road. Quarry Road. Daniel felt a cold steadiness settle over him. He pulled up county maps. Quarry Road intersected the service road about a mile farther west than the initial culvert location, meaning Eli had likely been driven farther out first, then relocated. Why relocate? Mallory voiced the same question. Why not just leave him where he first stopped? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled the gas station camera feed again, frame by frame. At 5:26 p.m., Henson's blue sedan passed westbound. At 5:31 p.m., it passed eastbound again, returning. 5-minute turnaround, too short for long-distance travel, but enough time to pull onto Quarry Road. Pause. Think. Then double back. Daniel leaned forward. He changed his mind, he said. Mallory frowned. About what? About where to leave him. The room went quiet. That wasn't theatrical. It was disturbingly human. A man picking up a child impulsively, maybe trying to impress, maybe trying to feel important, maybe intoxicated. Then realizing the situation had escalated beyond his control. Driving west. Stopping. Thinking. Then deciding on a different location, not because he planned harm, but because he didn't know how to undo what he'd started. They brought Henson back into interview. No aggression, no raised voices, just facts layered slowly. Daniel placed printed meteorology data on the table. You told us you drove straight home, Daniel said calmly. I did. Daniel slid the traffic timestamps forward. You passed the gas station westbound at 5:26. Then, eastbound at 5:31, Henson's jaw tightened. So? That's not a straight home route. Silence. Daniel didn't fill it. Mallory added gently, we also recovered soil from the culvert. It matches Quarry Road. A flicker crossed Henson's face. Small, but real. Daniel leaned forward slightly. You drove him out there first. Henson's breathing shifted. He was cold, he said suddenly. The first break. He was walking alone. I thought I was helping. Daniel kept his tone even. And then? Henson rubbed his forehead. I didn't think it through. Didn't think what through? That people would assume things. Assume what? Mallory asked. Henson's voice dropped. That I took him. Daniel felt the weight of that statement. You did take him, Daniel said quietly. Henson's eyes snapped up. I didn't touch him, that's not the point. Silence stretched. Henson swallowed. I drove him toward town. Then I thought, what if someone saw him in my car? What if they thought he stopped? Mallory didn't rescue him from the sentence. Henson exhaled shakily. So I turned off. I told him we'd make it funny. A hiding game. I was going to circle back after a few minutes. And did you? Daniel asked. Henson didn't answer immediately. His eyes dropped to the table. Snow still clung to the cuffs of his jeans from earlier. No, he whispered. The word barely audible. Why not? Because by the time I came back, I couldn't see him. Snow was worse. I panicked. Daniel felt anger rise, but he contained it. You left, Daniel said. Henson nodded faintly. I thought maybe he'd walked home already. That wasn't believable. But it wasn't cartoon villain logic either. It was cowardice. Mallory asked the necessary question. Were you drinking? Henson hesitated. Yes. There it was. Not malicious evil. Impaired judgment, fear of accusation, poor decision layered over poor decision. Daniel leaned back slowly. You understand that he nearly died. Henson's shoulders collapsed slightly. I know, and for the first time he looked genuinely shaken. Not theatrical, not dramatic, just the dawning realization of consequence. The reveal didn't end the pressure. It multiplied it, because now, internal affairs intensified review. Daniel's prior citation of Henson resurfaced again in paperwork. Defense counsel would argue bias. Entrapment. Harassment. The department wanted everything airtight, every timeline cross-checked, every body cam reviewed, every command during the search scrutinized. Daniel found himself back in the training yard that evening. Rex was there, under veterinary clearance for light movement only. The bandage was thinner now, the paw still tender. Daniel clipped on the lead loosely. They walked slowly. No tracking commands, just movement. Rex limped slightly at first, then steadied. Daniel stopped near the edge of the yard. You pulled west, he said quietly. Rex looked up at him. You were right, The dog didn't understand confession or guilt, but he understood tone. Daniel exhaled slowly. The twist wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a hidden mastermind. It was a man who made one reckless choice, then another. And a child who trusted an adult when he shouldn't have had to question it. But the stakes were widening, because the prosecutor was considering second-degree child endangerment, and the defense was already signaling they would argue lack of intent. Meaning, court, public scrutiny, media, and Rex's role in locating the child would be dissected in testimony. Mallory joined Daniel near the fence. County attorney wants you prepped for deposition. Daniel nodded. They'll question your decision to shift west, Mallory added. Defense might claim you redirected search after public tip. Daniel felt that old tension resurface. No, he said firmly. I followed the dog. Mallory gave a small nod. Then be ready to explain exactly why. Daniel looked down at Rex. The dog had hesitated, sat, shifted weight. Those details mattered, because this case wasn't about a dramatic takedown. It was about whether procedure and instinct aligned properly. And if Daniel couldn't articulate that clearly, the entire case could erode. Snow began melting faster under the late afternoon sun. Tracks from 2 nights ago were gone completely. Only memory remained. Daniel clipped Rex's lead off. The dog trotted slowly toward the water bowl, favoring the paw, but steady. There would be no applause, no parade, just paperwork, depositions, a courtroom where defense would dissect every decision. And Daniel knew this wasn't over. It was just moving into a different kind of storm. The courtroom was smaller than Daniel expected. Not dramatic, not imposing. Just fluorescent lighting, wood-paneled walls, and rows of folding seats that filled quietly as word spread through town. No television cameras, just neighbors. Familiar faces. People who bought groceries together and nodded at the same stoplights. Carl Henson sat at the defense table in a plain jacket, looking thinner than he had during the interview. Not hardened, not defiant, just worn. Rex wasn't supposed to be there. K-9 units rarely entered court unless necessary for demonstration. But the prosecutor had requested a controlled walkthrough of search protocol, including handler testimony about scent work in storm conditions. Daniel stood near the witness stand, uniform pressed, voice steady. He didn't feel steady. Because this wasn't about proving a dramatic crime, it was about proving responsibility. The defense attorney rose first. Officer Ruiz, you previously cited my client 3 years ago for public intoxication, correct? Yes. And that charge was dismissed? Yes. So when you arrived at his home the morning after the search, you already had a negative impression of him. Daniel didn't hesitate. No. The attorney paced slowly. Isn't it true you ignored standard grid protocol during the search? Daniel felt the question land heavier than the first. No. You redirected the search west, away from the established perimeter. I followed my K-9 partner's behavioral indicators. The attorney tilted his head slightly. You overrode your supervisor's initial plan, correct? Daniel paused. After observing my K-9's refusal to commit east, yes, so you disobeyed. No, Daniel said calmly. I reassessed based on working dog cues. The attorney's tone sharpened slightly. Or perhaps you were eager to find something that confirmed your existing bias. The room stayed still. Daniel didn't raise his voice. My decision was based on observable tracking behavior. The dog initially lost scent eastbound. When wind shifted, he regained directional commitment westbound. The prosecutor approached. Officer, explain for the court what you mean by commitment. Daniel exhaled slowly. A trained K-9 exhibits consistent forward pull, lowered head carriage, tail stabilization, and reduced scanning when scent is strongest. Rex demonstrated those indicators west. He did not demonstrate them east. Did he make mistakes during that track? Yes. The defense attorney looked up quickly. Daniel continued. He slipped on ice. He hesitated. He briefly sat when scent thinned. That's not failure. That's information. The prosecutor nodded. And what happened when you followed west? We located the child alive. Silence followed. Not applause, just quiet acknowledgement. The defense strategy shifted in the afternoon. They conceded that Henson gave Eli a ride. They conceded that he left him, but they argued lack of intent to harm. He panicked, the attorney said. He made a foolish decision. But there was no malice. That was partially true, and that was what made the case difficult. The prosecutor stood. Intent is not the only standard here. Recklessness under severe weather conditions is sufficient. The jury watched carefully. Daniel sat beside the aisle, hands folded, listening as Eli's recorded statement played. When the boy's voice said, "He told me it would be funny," several jurors looked down. Not in outrage, in discomfort. That was worse. Then came the moment no one expected. The defense called a weather specialist. The argument, survivability window. They suggested that based on temperature fluctuation, Eli could have survived longer than initially estimated, reducing perceived severity. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. Because if the jury believed Eli wasn't in immediate danger, the charge could weaken. The specialist explained drift formation patterns, used diagrams, charts, technical language. It sounded convincing, until the prosecutor did something subtle. She asked Daniel to take the stand again. "Officer Ruiz," she began, "how long had Rex been working before locating the culvert?" "Approximately 19 minutes westbound. And what condition was he in?" "Fatigued. Minor paw strain. Could he have continued much longer?" Daniel considered that carefully. "Possibly, but performance degrades in severe cold." "Meaning?" "Meaning if we had stayed east longer, or delayed shift, scent could have dissipated further." The prosecutor nodded. "So if the child had remained longer in that culvert," Daniel answered quietly, "probability of survival decreases sharply." The courtroom didn't react loudly. But the air changed, because it reframed the argument. This wasn't about theoretical survivability in controlled charts. It was about a child found by a working dog whose window was narrowing by the minute. Then came the hardest moment. Eli testified briefly, only a few questions. He didn't cry. He didn't dramatize. He simply said, "I didn't want to hide." That was enough. Outside during recess, Daniel stood near the courthouse steps. Snow from 2 weeks ago was gone completely now. Just damp pavement and early hints of thawed grass. Rex waited in the cruiser, not inside the building this time. Department policy limited court presence. Daniel opened the rear door. Rex stepped out slowly. The paw had healed enough for light duty. Daniel crouched, resting a hand against his neck. "You did your part," he murmured. Rex blinked once, calm. No understanding of legal nuance, just routine trust. Mallory stepped out of the courthouse. "They're deliberating." Daniel nodded. He didn't feel anticipation. He felt weight. Because no matter the verdict, the consequences already existed. A child who now hesitated before trusting adults. A man whose poor judgment could cost him freedom. A department under scrutiny for procedural integrity, and a K-9 team whose every movement had been dissected. The verdict came 2 hours later. Guilty of second-degree child endangerment. Not aggravated charges. But not dismissed. Henson didn't collapse. He didn't shout. He just closed his eyes briefly. His family sat behind him. Quiet. No one celebrated. Because this wasn't victory. It was accountability. The real crisis came afterward. Internal Affairs delivered their findings. Daniel's deviation from initial grid protocol was reviewed. Bodycam validated procedural reasoning. Mallory's oversight supported decision-making chain. Conclusion. No misconduct. No bias. But a recommendation. Additional documentation required in future deviation scenarios. It wasn't punishment. But it wasn't endorsement either. Daniel accepted it without argument. Because that was fair. Procedure matters, even when instinct is right. 3 days later, Rex returned to limited duty. Light tracking exercises only, no extended cold exposure. The paw held, but not perfectly. A slight stiffness remained after long runs. The veterinarian warned, ligament strain in winter sometimes leaves residual sensitivity, manageable, but real. Daniel knew what that meant, not immediate retirement, but a shortened horizon, the cost. It always existed. That night, Daniel visited the Mercer home, not in uniform, just checking in. Eli opened the door himself this time, slower, but smiling faintly. "Is Rex here?" he asked immediately. "In the car," Daniel said. Eli looked at his mother. She nodded once. They stepped outside. Rex exited carefully. Eli approached slowly, hand extended. Rex sniffed, accepted. Eli hugged him gently around the neck. Daniel watched the interaction quietly. No dramatic swelling music, no applause. Just a child reclaiming something simple, trust. But it wasn't untouched trust. It was adjusted, more careful. And that was the real consequence. As Daniel drove home later, Rex rested quietly in the back. Streetlights passed rhythmically overhead. The storm was long gone. But its effects lingered. Because the hero moment, finding the child, hadn't erased the damage, it had simply limited it. And that was the most realistic outcome of all. Spring arrived without ceremony. Snow receded in uneven patches along Mercer Road, exposing flattened grass and the shallow ditch where everything had nearly ended differently. The culvert looked smaller now, ordinary. Just a drainage pipe beneath a narrow road. Daniel parked there one morning before shift, not for investigation, just to stand still for a moment. Rex stepped out of the cruiser carefully. The limp was almost gone, but not entirely. After long runs, the stiffness returned, subtle, manageable, permanent. Daniel crouched near the culvert entrance. There were no markers anymore, no tape, no evidence flags, just dirt and gravel and runoff trickling through the pipe. It looked harmless. That unsettled him more than the storm had. Because danger rarely announces itself loudly. It hides in small decisions, in hesitation, in fear of being misunderstood. Rex sniffed along the ditch line, then turned back toward Daniel without alerting. There was nothing to find. There didn't need to be. The sentencing hearing was brief. Carl Henson received 18 months, suspended after 9, with supervised probation and mandatory counseling. The judge spoke plainly. "You were not charged with intent to harm," she said. "You were charged with reckless disregard for a child's life. The difference matters. But so does the outcome." Henson didn't argue. He didn't apologize publicly either. He just nodded once, eyes lowered. Daniel sat in the back row this time, not as a central figure, just as a witness to consequence. There was no applause when it ended. People filed out quietly. Small towns absorb events rather than explode from them. 2 weeks later, Rex failed a cold weather endurance assessment. Not dramatically, he completed the track, but slower. The veterinarian reviewed the data carefully. "Ligament stability is acceptable," she said. "But prolonged exposure to deep cold will aggravate it. You can continue limited duty, but I'd start planning transition." Daniel knew what that meant. Rex was 7. In K9 years, that was middle-aged. But for patrol work in harsh winters, it was near the edge. Mallory called him into the office that afternoon. "You've got options," he said. "Desk transition, training role, or start prepping a new dog." Daniel looked down at the file in his hands. Rex's service record. Commendations. Certifications. Tracks completed. And one winter search that would never make headlines beyond the county line. "I'll train the next one," Daniel said finally. Mallory nodded. "Rex stays with you." That part was never in question. The retirement ceremony happened on a Tuesday, not a weekend. No large audience. Just department staff, a few local officials, and the Mercer family standing near the back. Rex wore his working harness one last time. Daniel removed it slowly in front of the group. No dramatic speech, just a few words. He did his job, Daniel said. Even when I didn't understand it right away, that earned a few quiet smiles. Eli stepped forward afterward, holding something awkwardly wrapped in paper. He handed it to Daniel. Inside was a small framed photo. Rex standing in the snow, head turned west. Taken by one of the deputies that night, on the back, in uneven handwriting. "Thank you for not giving up." Daniel swallowed. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. Rex, unaware of ceremony or symbolism, leaned gently against Eli's side. That was enough. Life didn't return to what it had been. It shifted. Eli began walking to school again when weather improved, but he no longer accepted rides casually. His mother waited at the porch more often. Carl Henson's house went quiet. For sales sign-up by summer, some neighbors expressed sympathy, others didn't. The town didn't fracture, but it didn't forget either. As for Daniel, he started working with a young Belgian Malinois named Atlas 3 months later. High drive. Faster than Rex ever was, less patient, more impulsive. Training Atlas required sharper timing, quicker corrections. Daniel found himself repeating something often. Watch the hesitation. It tells you more than the sprint. Atlas didn't understand the sentence. But Daniel did, because Rex had taught him that lesson the hard way. One evening in early autumn, Daniel sat on his back porch while Rex lay beside him, graying around the muzzle now. The air was cool, but not punishing. Rex shifted slightly, resting his head on Daniel's boot. There was no vest, no radio, no urgency. Just a dog at rest. Daniel thought about the moment in the field when he'd first forced east, about the minutes lost, about how close the margin had been. He understood something more clearly now. Courage wasn't the dramatic charge into danger, it was the quiet willingness to adjust, to admit uncertainty, to follow evidence even when it complicates pride. Rex hadn't been heroic in a cinematic way. He had hesitated, slipped, strained a ligament. But he had remained honest to the scent, and that honesty had saved a life. Daniel reached down and scratched behind Rex's ear. "You were right," he said softly. Rex's tail thumped once against the wooden boards, not because he understood vindication, but because he recognized the tone. Trust. That was the real story. Not the storm, not the courtroom, not the charges. Trust between a handler and a dog. Trust in procedure over ego. Trust that small behavioral cues matter. Trust that consequences, even when quiet, shape communities. As dusk settled, Daniel stood and walked back inside. Rex followed at a slower pace now, still steady, still attentive, just no longer working. The ditch on Mercer Road would eventually fill with weeds. The culvert would rust slowly. New snow would fall next winter. And somewhere, another decision would test someone else's judgment. But this time, Daniel would listen sooner. Because loyalty isn't loud, instinct isn't magical, and courage rarely looks like a spotlight. Sometimes, it looks like a dog leaning west in the middle of a storm,